I wanted to go into a bit of a rant. I today I was on the Soul Asylum Misery music video, and about a year ago, I left a comment, very casually, that just said that one of the most underrated songs of the '90s. And ever since, I've been dogged by people that come back and are like, "What do you mean? It was one of the most popular songs in the '90s?" And of course, I've gone back and explained that, yeah, it was popular in the '90s. Like, like, and then what? Like, what ultimately happened and became of it? It's mostly like a relic of the past and forgotten. I've been getting this group of detractors, and so like, this guy comes forward and says "Misery" topped the modern rock chart and went on number 20 on the Billboard. The second number could have been higher. Here's the thing: I found this song on a jukebox in an old band's bar in the '90s. Like, and I'm sitting here thinking that he's basically saying it went to number one. How do you get to underrated? And I'm thinking to myself, yeah, it was a fad. Like, a lot of a lot of songs, get up to that status, and then it's barely talked about anymore. I mean, like, the Gin Blossoms too are from the same era, super popular then, but who talks about them now anymore? To everyone that replied that this song was a chart topper at the time, how do you get to underrated about the song? All I have for you is simply that song did get pretty high in the charts, but then it was forgotten very quickly after that. It had its brief moment in the spotlight, but it's mostly forgotten now. That's what I meant. When you think of the '90s, is this what you really think of? And yet, this person comes forward, this Kevin Wagner Soul. This song was, it's huge in the '90s. No idea, no clue what you were on, dude. In the '90s, I was getting my ass bullied by other people. My only friends were fucking music. And I literally just explained that it was a passing fad. When's the last time you heard this one on the FM radio? Yeah, in the '90s, I bet. Chopped Harper then, but I believe this one is pretty much a classic. And then when I hear people talking about music, I don't hear that this one brought up much at all. And I'm like, it's a classic. It should be talked about still. By that rationale, everything is underrated, he replies, but because everything is a passing fad, and who listens to FM radio? I hear Soul Asylum all the time on Pandora, Spotify, and YouTube, and I'm thinking to myself, and in response, this is one of the dumbest arguments I've ever fucking heard somebody spit back at me, because, I'm thinking, like, do you not understand that Pandora, Spotify, YouTube, and all those other platforms are ultimately programmed by their users? I mean, who ultimately spits the songs in that tell Pandora what to play? Who ultimately spits in the songs that tell Spotify and YouTube to ultimately play, so that its algorithm, recommends something to you? I mean, this is the one thing that I've had over a lot of the people that come into, to shit talk on the Young Turks for the longest time. I mean, I like to comment a lot and point out that the trolls of that particular platform, like, if you want to really, if you're like a real dedicated hater, you're not gonna ultimately comment on that person's videos at all. You're gonna go up here, make your own videos, criticizing them, and then go quietly your own way, because the truth of the matter is that the algorithm favors videos that have lots of comments on it. And my my counter argument to this person is just, yeah, of course you hear Soul Asylum on Pandora, because you program that shit into those particular platforms. I listen to the same things, and I don't hear them often, because they're not ultimately programmed into mine, largely because of the fact that I'm mostly still, in a stage where I still find new things to listen to, and I'm definitely trying to, like, expand my taste in music based on what I actually listen to. So, I'm in that, and yeah, I like the song a lot, but it's not one of the things that's actually programmed into my Pandora. And I'm sitting here, like, arguing with this person, and he's like, and I'm like, FM radio is not dying anywhere near the extent that people here on YouTube like to pretend, and to pretend that it's not relevant anymore. I wish it wasn't. I wish the radio was dying. I'm very much part of the kill your radio crowd. I wish nobody listens to it, and LOL, I hear it on Pandora. Like I'm like sitting here and I write back, that thing is literally programmed by the people that use it. And he writes back, I didn't say it was dying. How old are you? You make very little sense. And I'm sitting here reading, I didn't say it was dying, and all that's going through my head is, yeah, you didn't literally say it, but your words implied it, and you meant it, whether you said it or not. And to come up here and pretend otherwise, that you didn't mean it, is at best pretentious. Like, there's no way for radio to continue existing in a world where nobody listens to it. I mean, it just doesn't happen. I mean, and I explain my perspective. I'm like, and the radio, the FM terrestrial radio, does not ultimately exist to expose people to music. Like, its business model is ultimately to get its listeners to listen to it long enough to actually continue listening to the radio. I mean, that's what they do. It's why they exist at all. And so, if you'll know if you're a fan of any particular genre of music that you want to hear like continuously throughout. You get into the mood for it, like, for an extended period of time. And like me, you might have eclectic taste, but sometimes you're just in the mood for like one litany of songs in the same genre after another. And the problem with the problem with what we've got, and with terrestrial radio, is just, if you're like that, and you're all in the mood for rock and only rock, you'll be listening to the rock station, then it will cut to ad, and then you'll try to change the channel to the other rock station in town, and lo and behold, they're at commercial too, and have been, just cut to commercial as well. You start to realize, as you listen to the radio, that the consumer experience of it is, ultimately one in which it reveals that it really is just there to push advertisements on its listeners. And so, what like, they have stopped experimenting with, they've stopped pushing new songs on their audience, because the fact of the matter is that they don't, they're there just to get you to listen to long enough to not change the channel, so that you'll listen to the freaking ads and sit through and tolerate that. So they've gotten more repetitive instead of less, because people will change the channel, as they've research has told, if they don't like a song that's new, or they're not familiar with it yet. And that's just kind of the unfortunate reality of it. Whereas somebody like me wouldn't necessarily change the channel, but unless it was something that I really despised. But you know, the fact of the matter, is this person is basically they're trying to, weasel their way out of, being committed to a position that is ultimately untenable. They know. See, the problem is just that, in a world in which FM radio wasn't dying, you wouldn't be asking the question. I didn't. You wouldn't be asking the question, who listens to it? Because your question, you want, and YouTube wants us to go to this place of who listens to FM radio anymore. And in response to be like either nobody, or to say something along the lines of people that are 65 and above, like the olds, they they listen to it, but they'll be gone soon. Like they want you to push in that direction. And I mean, admittedly, yeah, the music landscape has ultimately changed, and there are all these new great ways to get music and whatnot. But we have to deal with stupid arguments like this. And unfortunately, YouTube and a lot of its crowd, and its in crowd, likes to ultimately pretend this way. It likes to ask that question because it's kind of nudging us in this direction of trying to say that no one listens to FM radio anymore. But the problem is just that if no one listens to, you know, the problem is just that if no one listens to terrestrial radio anymore, its business model would, ultimately break down, and people would pull the plug, and the assets would be stripped, repurposed and sold off to somebody else. potentially the military or some other, communications, somebody else that could use the broadcast ability, for non-commercial purposes, but that space right now and that broadcasting, space is, reserved ultimately for profit institutions at the moment, and it has been for as long as I've been alive, and as long as many of us have been alive, ultimately, um, longer even than I've been alive, so it's been there. The problem with the radio industry is just that it's ultimately changed a lot with even within my own lifetime. I was born in '86, and I can definitely remember a time in which the radio was a lot more willing to ultimately take a risk on what it played than it is today. I mean, it's decayed. I mean, I remember the '90s radio. I remember a lot of the stuff that got played on there. I remember Leah Androni being, actually radio worthy. I remember a lot of things, actually getting put on that, no other decade would have ultimately put on. And then, all of a sudden it's become the cesspool that it is. Even our station locally seems to have fallen to, the trend. And so, I'm not a fan ultimately of the radio. I've stopped listening to FM radio. I used to be. I used to have a radio in my room. Now you'd literally almost have to pay me to listen to the shit that, they spew, because I I ultimately there's a number of factors. I mean, I think that, I know that this is going to come as something of a shock to anybody if they've listened to like 11 minutes of my content, but I like the fact that now every time like Carly Rae Jepsen comes on, I don't want to, get out a knife and, murderously stab my speakers and anybody that, ultimately plays that particular music at me, or, I like that. I like that I'm not so sick of their music that it's, making me angry to even hear them played. I like, ultimately being able to listen to something that's mainstream without having feelings of aggression, anger, inspired in me because I no longer listen to the FM radio. I like being exposed to a broad diversity of content that I wouldn't see any other way, but internet radio and that experience. And I'm no longer a consumer of FM radio, but I guess you could say I feel like I was an early adopter and early to a trend that, my generation ultimately eventually ended up embracing, and we did ultimately kill our radios, but, the truth of the matter is that, I did that before a lot of the rest of you did, I didn't come up here on YouTube and talk about it, but I had done it, a long time before a lot of the rest of you ultimately did. I mean, I left FM radio like 20 years ago. I stopped listening to it for the most part.